All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining. Right now, I'm just looking at my picture of myself, but there are other people on this panel. I'm hoping to see them soon. I see their names. This is Medicalization of Ayahuasca, Promises, Challenges, and Reciprocity. So I'm just going to take a few moments to introduce the topic. Hopefully you read the paragraph there that was written about this session. It's very nicely written and put together by the Chacruna team. Just thank you to Chacruna and to everybody for being here, to the guests, to the panelists. Looking forward to this. I want to express a few things before I introduce the panelists. I'm here broadcasting from Medellin, Colombia. Just comment here, one of the many places that has suffered intensely due to the war on drugs. The cartels that became so notorious here as they sought riches to try to supply the West's insatiable appetite for cocaine. A very sad story of the West's extractive attitude and, behavior toward one of South America's most sacred plants, coca. So then a more happy story for me personally, although maybe not everyone agrees, my own personal story of these cultures coming together, my time, working in Peru, being a medical doctor, deciding to go down to Peru, participating in this world of ayahuasca tourism, frowned upon by some, and then going through the training myself and spending a lot of time getting involved, and then eventually going back to Arizona where I'm from. My family's from here, from Colombia, but I'm an American. I'm from Arizona. Went back up there, shared my ceremony with some native friends of mine that are here. Belinda's here, Belinda, Eracho, Naomi Sotzi, some other Navajo friends and colleagues of mine, sharing medicine with them, with their families. And, having a really beautiful experience, helping them find something that they, were very happy to find in that medicine, indigenous people. And then, having the interesting experience where them, as Navajo ladies, really with the desire to go to Peru, themselves, extremely grateful for receiving this sacred medicine, grateful for the sharing that the Shipibos kind of provided through me and people like me, to go and directly express their gratitude to Ricardo Amaringo, my Shipibo teacher, and his colleagues, Shipibo colleagues, humbly and respectfully in the Maloka, offering gifts before ceremony, offering prayer, offering song, expressing their heartfelt gratitude, face to face with these Shipibos, So I say, perhaps such a process is more natural between indigenous cultures, but perhaps we could all learn from their example. And I think that's the spirit of the Sacred Plants Conference. And so that's how we ended up all being here, this very interesting group of people. So we're talking about the medicalization of ayahuasca. From a United States perspective, United States, ayahuasca is largely illegal. There's three pathways to legal consumption. There's religious practice. There's decriminalization, that the psychedelic community is behind. Perhaps many indigenous communities are also interested in that. Medicalization, what we're talking about right now, clinical research, all that kind of pathway, coming out of this inspiration that, many scientists and doctors in the United States, in Brazil, in Peru, and other places, inspired by their own personal experiences with the medicine, and then and what they've observed, in healing other people. They've published research investigating neuroscience, depression, addiction, treatment of grief, for example, and other topics. Some cases, these are studies conducted in ceremonial settings. Sometimes these are in clinical settings, sometimes some kind of hybridized setting. And some have offered that this work raises interest and appreciation of indigenous culture and spiritual healing techniques. So that such work might, can help to moderate, that maybe people doing ayahuasca or learning about sacred ceremony in North America would help moderate this extractive culture. And that it might inspire reciprocity, this gratitude, to the cultures that shared their sacred medicine. So that's the question, will Amazonian cultures be remembered, honored, and be respected, or will they be forgotten in this research movement? So history shows that the prior relationship has been extremely extractive and destructive. So then we have a few people here to tell us today, what is the current situation of indigenous people in the Colombian Amazon, in the Brazilian Amazon, in the Amazon, and what is their current experience of Western culture. So we're here to consider different perspectives on the medicalization of ayahuasca and see if we can't find a way in this ancient tradition of the Americas, like when Belinda and Naomi came down to thank Ricardo, to offer gratitude for sacred gifts, to learn how we might be able to help one another. So that's the spirit of what we're here to do. So I want to introduce the panelists. The panel is just a few minutes, okay, to say something about why you're here or what you'd like to thank, and then, as we've gone over before, we have the questions. It's just kind of a hot, fiery topic, so we took some time to talk to everybody. So first I'm going to introduce Miguel Evanjuanoy Chindoy. He is a member of the Inga people from Putumayo, Colombia. He's born in a beautiful hill. I'm going to read their intros just briefly. Was born in a beautiful hilltop village, part of an indigenous territory named where local cosmovision and collective work are the pillars of the community of life. Miguel is a community leader and an environmental engineer and has been a devout follower of Yahe medicine, ayahuasca, since his childhood years. He acts as a spokesperson for UMIYAC, the Union of Indigenous Yahe Medics of the Colombian Amazon. Specifically, his work focuses on the role that indigenous spirituality plays in territorial defense and environmental conservation. He's also interested in how Yahe medicine practiced by local indigenous traditional healers contributes to peace building, the improvement of community health, and the reconstruction of the social fabric in war-torn rural Colombia. Recently, Miguel has been speaking internationally about the impact that development models based on extractive economy and the depletion of Earth's vital resources are having on the Amazonian biocultural ecosystems. On behalf of his organization and community, he's also taking a stand against cultural appropriation and the indiscriminate commercialization of indigenous practices and sacred plants, with the claim that this marketed spirituality is negatively impacting both indigenous people and Western users alike. Buenas noches, Miguel. Quizás se puede presentar un momento y después están las preguntas.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Buenas tardes. En primer lugar, aquí al amigo, al que nos yo. Disculpa que no puedo prestar bien nombre. Ya creo que me presentaste, creo que todos saben que yo soy Evanjuanoy Chindoy, soy miembro de acá del pueblo del puerto de Chunguillo, municipio de Mocoa, departamento del Putumayo.
Ya, muy bien. Gracias. So this is Miguel. He's presented himself. He's thanking me for translating and helping him, and saying good evening to everyone. So thank you, Miguel, for being here. It's an honor to have him here. Next, I want to introduce Daiara, Tukano, Duhigoku, and you can forgive me, Miguel couldn't pronounce Joseph. I don't know if I can pronounce some of these words, but I'm going to try. Is a member of the Yepa Masa, Tukano, indigenous people of the Alto Rio Negro and the Brazilian Amazon. She was born in Sao Paulo, Brazil. She's an artist, an activist, an educator, and a communicator. She holds a master's in human rights from the University of Brasilia and is a researcher on the right to the memory, and the truth of indigenous people. She's a coordinator of Radio Yandé, the first indigenous radio in Brazil. There's the website is available there through the radioyandé.com. She studies the culture, history, and traditional spirituality of indigenous people and their environment. She resides in Brasilia. Hello, Daiara. Welcome.
Hello, estimação. Boa noite, bom dia, boa tarde. My name is Daiara. You did a very good presentation. I think you speak a little too fast. I will speak slower than you. But I am really pleased to be here. This is a very important conversation and a very important subject that we are going to approach tonight. And I'm very happy to be also with my relative Miguel. Buenas noches, Miguel. Buenas tardes. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Daiara. Okay, I'm going to introduce now Leanna Standish with all her acronyms there are available on the thing. Is a neuroscientist and a physician living in Seattle, Washington. United States. She's co-founder of the Advanced Integrative Medical Science Institute, AIMS, a research clinic which provides integrative oncology and psychiatry care, including intravenous phytotherapies, ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. For more than 2 decades, Dr. Standish has been studying ayahuasca chemistry, pharmacology, ethnobotany, and cultural anthropology with the goal of conducting legal ayahuasca clinical research in the United States. In 2020, she and Dr. Victoria Hale co-founded Sacred Medicines PBC in order to obtain FDA approval for ayahuasca tea. Dr. Standish also owns and operates an ethnobotanical preserve on the island of Hawaii, where she protects and studies sacred Amazonian rainforest plants. She has authored numerous peer-reviewed papers in the areas of psychopharmacology, HIV/AIDS, breast cancer, micro-oncology, and functional magnetic brain imaging. Good evening, Leanna.
Hi. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so inspired by this conference. I have been listening astutely to presentations, especially from the representatives from South American indigenous groups. And I want to just take this time of just a few minutes to tell you who I am and how I came to be here with Victoria, trying to get ayahuasca research approved by the FDA. So a little bit about me. I'm a neuroscientist and a physician. I live in Seattle, Washington. I have always been interested in the mind-body problem, the question about what is consciousness? Is the mind produced by the brain? What happens when the brain dies? Is the mind inside the brain, or is the brain inside the mind? And I've been struggling with that question my whole life. And I've also, I have to admit, struggled with mild depression my whole life as well. And because that may be relevant to some people in this audience, I am also two-spirited. I encountered ayahuasca 22 years ago, shortly after my mother's death by suicide. Shortly after my mother's death, I met Luis Eduardo Luna, an ayahuasquero and cultural anthropologist, and the author of this wonderful book called The Ayahuasca Reader. And I met him at a consciousness science conference at the University of Arizona. And after his lecture, I'd never heard of ayahuasca before, and he lectured about it, and I was so fascinated. I went up to him after the lecture and I said, how can I learn more? And he invited me to come to Brazil to attend a traditional ayahuasca retreat. And of course, I went. I must say that swallowing my first ayahuasca was one of the bravest things I ever did in my whole life. I was very afraid. I am still afraid to drink ayahuasca each and every time, although I'm so grateful that I did. But then after my first time, 45 minutes later, after drinking my first ayahuasca, my first sacred tea, I had my first awakening. My consciousness was expanded in ways I could never have imagined before. I experienced the breathtaking beauty of the living, breathing universe, its multiple dimensions, and I experienced directly the interconnectivity of all living things. I encountered the consciousness of the plant biosphere. And it was then that I realized that the indigenous ontology is much more accurate than the impoverished Western scientific materialism ontology that I had been raised on. In ayahuasca, I had encountered a truly miraculous medicine, and I thought, finally, an important, powerful medicine that I can share with my patients. If only my mother had been able to drink ayahuasca, maybe she would be alive now. I think of ayahuasca now as a kind of a vaccination against despair. One single dose often is enough to wake up the mind permanently. Since my first drinking of ayahuasca, I have wanted to bring ayahuasca to my patients in the United States, but how? It's illegal. It's illegal because it contains dimethyltryptamine, which is a Schedule I drug in the United States. It was my first ayahuasca retreat that I met Dennis McKenna, whose brother Terrence had just died of a brain tumor, the same disease that had killed my own father. And Dennis was seeking someone to take over the stewardship of the sacred plants that Terrence and Dennis and Kathleen Harrison had brought, cultivated and nurtured in an old growth rainforest on the big island of Hawaii, and they grow there now. They thrive there. They've been there almost 50 years. I began by studying and learning from traditional healers in Shipibo tradition, as well as Barclinia, Unio de Vegetal traditions. I participated in 15 ayahuasca ceremonies, and I asked each healer after the ceremony if I might have permission to be granted a small sample of the tea to analyze in my lab. Each and every one of those healers readily agreed. I was quite surprised.
Leanna, we're going to have to move to the questions pretty soon. Okay, I just want to let you know because everybody else, they left a lot of time.
Okay.
So maybe you could kind of bring it together.
And I want to just say that a good portion of my life has been devoted to bringing ayahuasca to the United States. And Victoria and I are capable of, and we believe in the path that Joe mentioned of taking it through the FDA. And I'm going to now turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Leanna. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. I just want to respect the people's time. Now I'm going to introduce Victoria Hale, who has been introduced there. PhD is a pharmaceutical scientist, executive, and global health social entrepreneur. She was founder and CEO of two successful nonprofit pharmaceutical companies, One World Health and Medicines 360. One World Health was the first nonprofit pharmaceutical company in the U.S. She's a MacArthur Fellow, was inducted into the United States National Academy of Medicine, has been recognized as an outstanding global social entrepreneur by Skull, Ashoka, and Schwab Foundations. Her drug development experience was obtained at the FDA and Genentech. She earned her PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry from UCSF, where she is presently adjunct professor of bioengineering and experimental sciences. Dr. Hale is a member of the MAPS board of directors and is co-founder of co-CEO of Sacred Medicines PBC. Hello, Victoria. You're muted, I think. There you go.
Thank
say
you.
Hello?
Yes, hello everyone. Just briefly, I am a pharmaceutical scientist, but 20 years ago, I decided that I wanted to apply my work very differently in the world. So I've been focusing on public health as opposed to diseases of the West. My first company was focused on infectious disease. Second is contraception. And now Sacred Medicines is mental health. I've worked with different business models, nonprofits, for-profits, and now we are choosing to go with a hybrid nonprofit, for-profit business model. And that's very important in the discussion of what we're doing here. Maybe we'll focus on that a little bit today. And then thirdly, what type of medicines do I want to develop? And I am very committed to developing natural products. And by the way, I think people who are attending this conference would realize that many of the medicines that are on the shelves in pharmacies today were derived from natural medicines. But let's keep the medicines natural and not simply have them be derived.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, so now we have these rounds of questions. The goal is to keep the answers to 5 minutes so we can get to all these different questions. So we've developed with everyone involved and BS Help a series of questions. The first question is for Leanna and Victoria together. Okay. It says, so far, the FDA has approved only the development of 2 botanical drugs. This would be the first botanical psychedelic medicine to be developed in the West. Why did you choose to work with the natural plants and not DMT and harmine pure chemicals? Also, in regular clinical trials with synthetic psychedelics, MDMA, psilocybin, LSD, psychotherapists are employed. Why did you choose to work with shamanic practitioners? In sum, you claim that you are not just developing a drug, but a system of care with shamanic practitioner-led ceremonies and honoring spiritual healing. We want people to understand, is this better? Can you please explain where and how will the ayahuasca room be made? What is the process of standardization of ayahuasca? How will shamanic practitioners conduct sessions? And what will be the process of certification of shamanic practitioners? A lot of questions, but it's just there to present it to both of you.
Hey, Leanna, begin.
All right, let me begin. Let's start with the question of why whole plant medicines. My training is in naturopathic medicine, and I learned in my medical training to respect plants. That's the answer to that question. The next question about how to make it. I want to just say this. So what I was saying, I was talking too long during the intro, I apologize, but what I was getting to is what are we basing our formula on? It's actually the wisdom of indigenous people, collecting these samples, analyzing them, finding how much of the active constituents, dimethyltryptamine and the harmful alkaloids were present, and then developing a formula that we could emulate. And so that was how we came to do it. And going through getting Food and Drug Administration approval, permission to do these human studies requires us to have a medicine that is safe, it's pure, it's free of contaminants, and it's roughly the same every time you make it, so that the healer, the practitioner who's administering this tea, can be confident that this is good medicine. Back to Victoria.
Okay. Let me add as well to the standardizing ayahuasca. FDA requires us to define concentrations of a couple of different substances, only one of which is DMT within our formulation. Your question as to why we are not employing psychotherapists, Leanna and I have had beautiful and profound experiences working with shaman and shamanic practitioners. And we want to keep the administration of ayahuasca as similar as we can to the beautiful experiences that indigenous people have developed and are sharing with the world. We speak of not developing just a drug, but a system of care. This program with ayahuasca, to our knowledge, is the first time that shamanic practitioners have been brought forward to the FDA. And we don't know how it's going to be received, but we do understand, or we begin to understand and appreciate the power of shamanic healing. And we would like to expand this and have shamanic healers and botanists and people who are experts in plant medicine associated with plant medicine development that the FDA sees and understands.
Okay.
Can I
Go ahead, Leanna.
one more thing about, and I think this is such an important point, is that the plants that make our ayahuasca tea come from Hawaii. We're not, and we grow them, and we're not participating in any way with the destruction of the Amazon River basin. And these were cultivars that were collected from Peru many years ago by Dennis, Terrence, and Kat, and they have been vouchered and they're clones. And so that goes a long way to be able to make a tea that is roughly the same every time you make it.
Okay, well, thank you for those answers to the questions. So we'll just keep it moving for now. So the next question is actually directed to Miguel. Miguel, lo voy a leer en inglés y luego la traducción en español. Yeah? So I have the questions here, Miguel. Miguel is getting translation from his friend Ricardo Vitale, who's part of Umiyak, who's listening, and Daiara speaks English. So we're okay there. So here's a question for Miguel from Umiyak. You have spoken against cultural appropriation and even argued that cultural appropriation foments cultural and physical extermination. Can you explain what you mean by this and why Umiyak defends this posture? Entonces ya, Miguel, te voy a preguntar. La idea es como 5 minutos le damos aunque no es la tradición, pero 5 minutos. Entonces, ha hablado en contra de la apropiación cultural e incluso ha argumentado que la apropiación cultural fomenta el exterminio cultural y físico. ¿Puede explicar qué significa esto y por qué la Umiyak defiende esta postura?
Gracias. Pues creo que es importante también hacer una pregunta, ¿no? Yo siempre hago esto. Líderes, autoridades indígenas que estamos participando en este evento. Personas que están, digamos, detrás de la medicalización Ahora sí voy a exactamente, voy a hacer todo lo posible para solamente sobre la apropiación solamente de la planta. Son diferentes formas que ha llegado a la Amazonía a exterminar con los pueblos indígenas. Burro, la ganadería, la coca y el narcotráfico. Actores que nos quieren exterminar indígenas. Y hay que mirar, en este caso muy especial de Colombia, que nos hemos la Corte ha señalado el riesgo de exterminio físico y cultural. Entonces, lo primero que tenemos que ver, bien desde allá, es muy preocupante ver cómo se quiere, digamos, está yendo nuestros conocimientos a los pueblos indígenas, sigue utilizando a nuestras plantas sagradas.
Yeah. Déjame traducir un poco. Ya, Miguel, traduzco y seguimos. So Miguel is saying, he threw out the question. He said, well, how many, it was broken a little bit, but I think I heard how many indigenous leaders or spiritual leaders are behind this research process, that's his thing. But then in response to my question, this issue about cultural appropriation, fomenting cultural and physical extermination, so it's not just the plant medicine or people extracting the sacred plant medicine. He says it's many ways that their culture is under assault, whether that's through hydrocarbons, petroleum, cattle ranching, the coca, the drug trafficking. Like, these are the ways that the external world is extracting, from anything. In particular, in the Colombian Amazon, they're currently under direct threat, from the government. They've expressed, this desire to. They've warned the Amazonian communities, that they're in danger, that they could be exterminated, that they're not the priority. Things are rough here in Colombia for the Amazon. He says, and meanwhile, people keep from the outside coming to take from them, as they say, to pillage, to keep turning into marketing, these sacred medicines, all this kind of stuff. So, sigue, Miguel.
Y con esta mercantilización comercial están apareciendo las malas prácticas, debilitando los de los pueblos. Y eso es lo que a nosotros cada vez nos están pisoteando, terminar, nos quieren acabar. Que milenariamente hemos venido las tierras sagradas de la Amazonía.
Yeah, he says that, the problem is this commercialization to him represents the same bad practices that have been behind what has been weakening the indigenous communities of the Amazon over and over and over again. He says, so they can step on us, and apparently they want to exterminate us and they want to eliminate us. Like, that's what they gather from what's happening. Sigue, Miguel.
Creo que hemos visto, ustedes han estado informados de lo que está pasando con el caso de Varela. No sé si estoy bien. Inclusive la amiga Vía presentó una denuncia. Presentábamos también historias, lo que ha estado sucediendo con la medicina. Cómo han manipulado, cómo la están usando. Ahí es donde nosotros y estamos hablando de que si seguimos con ese proceso, con las malas prácticas, mal uso de las plantas sagradas, pues estamos ya, no sé, yo digo, ¿será que los pueblos indígenas estamos condenados a sufrir ese exterminio? Entonces, eso sería, pues, mi gracias.
Yeah, muy bien, Miguel, gracias. He says that, he's talking about this Varela case. I'm not an expert in the Varela case, but it's the case of someone misappropriating the medicine and saying that he's working, I think, within the tribe's blessings, but he wasn't. And, I think Bia and Chacrona have denounced this person, and other people have denounced them. So he says they're concerned about this ongoing manipulation, these ongoing bad practices, which to him, as an indigenous person, it feels like it's the same story that he says, for some reason, it seems that we are condemned to be exterminated, and forgotten. So that's what Miguel has to say for now. We'll continue with questions. So I'm going to move to, thank you, Miguel, I told him already, to Daiara. Okay, Daiara. Question for you. What are indigenous people in Brazil doing to handle problems associated with the globalization of ayahuasca? Can you speak about the indigenous ayahuasca conferences? How can non-indigenous people be good allies to indigenous people?
Well, yeah.
Hi, we can hear you, yes.
Okay. So, here in Brazil, we have many indigenous peoples, mainly in the state of Acre. That was the place where the ayahuasca churches were born, that are making this great articulation towards the discussion around ayahuasca, the globalization of ayahuasca, all the policies and legislations related to that. But they are not the only indigenous ayahuasca nations. As for example, I am from the Tukano indigenous nation. Actually, the scientific name of ayahuasca is in Tukano language. So when I say this is carpi. Carpi is how we call ayahuasca in our language. And you may understand that we were one of the first that made contact with the Western science and botanics and Western civilization by itself. When we talk about this genocide, my nation, we have 400 years of contact and 400 years of demonization of our traditional practices. Our houses, our traditional houses were burned down. Until today, the presence of Catholic and Neo-Pentecostal churches still criminalize and demonize the traditional practices. Today, in very few people actually still gather the knowledge of ayahuasca. We are not one of those that are traveling the world or doing ceremonies or receiving white people to do ceremonies in our communities. We still face, as Miguel was saying, we still face illegal gold mining, drug traffic, people traffic, and several kinds of violences in our territories. Personally, I was listening to Leanna's story about her mother. And I really sympathize with that, because actually in indigenous communities, we know how hard and strong and difficult it is to deal with indigenous suicide, for example. Indigenous peoples commit 3 more times suicide than other ethnicity in the world. Suicide more, we are more susceptible to alcoholism and other kind of violences. We are very, very susceptible to depression, and what leads, like the violence leads to depression, that leads to other mental illness. And of course, I believe that ayahuasca can really help my nation to face many of those questions. But the thing is that it is to face all of that is not just it's not easy to reinforce, to celebrate the traditional knowledge. We are still facing genocide here in Brazil. Brazil is the nation, is a country in the world that kills the most of environmental defenders, and more than half of them are indigenous leaders. So we deal with a lot, And when we talk about the globalization of ayahuasca, we need to talk about all that as well. for example, that today in the world, we have more non-indigenous peoples that are drinking ayahuasca than indigenous persons. There are more white, rich people that are able to reach ayahuasca ceremonies than indigenous peoples, because we are under a very severe social marginalization and empowerment and so many difficulties. So we had the opportunity to receive a World Conference of Ayahuasca in Brazil, in the state of Acre. It was really special because many leaders from several indigenous peoples participated, but they felt really apart from the discussions that came from the religious churches and the pharmaceutical interests and the scientific interests as well. It's really difficult to have a balanced and respectful communication with indigenous peoples and more with indigenous spiritual leaders. We have a strong challenge that is the continuity of the, you may, no, I won't ask for your pardon, but the stupidity of racism that claims the superiority of the Western knowledge. You know, like Western science, Western law, Western knowledge is considered to be better and is full of privilege and is never ready to listen to the indigenous considerations or the indigenous on what we consider to be respectful. So that's why we organized an indigenous conference of ayahuasca here in Brazil after the World Ayahuasca Conference. And in our conference, we had some points that were not discussed in the World Conference, as for example, the protection of our territories and how the globalization can affect our communities. And when we say globalization, we also talk about the market, the transportation, and how capitalism affects our communities. Because as I told you, I am from a nation that is not doing tourism on ayahuasca. We don't do that. But we are a traditional nation where every knowledge comes from that medicine. And we are not the only one. I don't know how many indigenous nations you know that have ayahuasca as a medicine of origin, but we are more than 100 in the whole Amazon forest. In Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Venezuela, Bolivia, mainly in the Guyanas. We are more than 100 indigenous nations that are indigenous civilizations that have this original knowledge, and that that are not heard, listened in the actual in the global, with many commas, in the global discussions on ayahuasca. And so I'm finishing. The only thing that we are able to do is trying to reaffirm the international agreements and laws on the protection on indigenous patrimony, on indigenous heritage, cultural heritage, and the genetical heritage as well. Because for us, our knowledge is not only the practice. Like ayahuasca is not just a plant. The knowledge of ayahuasca as a medicine comes from several different cultures, and our cultures need to be respected. Need to be respected. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daiara. Thank you very much for your clarity. Okay, I'm going to continue. Or I'm not going to comment. There's a lot of action here. I want to continue to the next question to Leanna and Victoria. Okay, and thank you too for being here. Here we go. Next question. You talk a lot about reciprocity. Who invented that and what does that mean? Due to colonial legacies, is it possible to really claim reciprocity or historical reparation to indigenous nations? How will indigenous people benefit from the medicalization of their sacred plants? If you allow Amazonian indigenous communities to apply for the potential economic benefits from your project, aren't you creating a competition between them and using money to advance your own agenda? What if indigenous people express dissident and dissonant views? Would you be willing to not conduct these FDA clinical trials? So either whoever would like to start, Leanna or Victoria. Victoria, I think you're muted.
Apologies. There has been so much harm done, murders and pain and destruction and complete loss of trust that is understandable. And we don't expect to make up for that. I think perhaps what we have a possibility to do is influence the terrible situation that exists today. Is it possible that through spiritual healing of individuals who make decisions about what policies to proceed with, who hold racist approaches in place, I don't know of a better medicine for people of the world who are leaders to be encouraged to use, if not ayahuasca. But as Daiara said, it's not just the plant. It actually is the practice, and it is the ceremony, and it is the healers who lead it. So that is the frame that we hold with reciprocity. I was trained in the pharmaceutical sector, and there is something called CSR, corporate social responsibility. That is not what we're pursuing. We're looking for something to build, something that is about relationship and coming together and having trust and respect. We would love to engage communities and ayahuasca healers in the work that we're doing. We understand and appreciate how challenging it is to introduce these very diverse approaches to healing to an organization like the FDA. So there are limits, but we do want to proceed to do that. We want reciprocal science. Leanna and I don't know what spiritual healing is or energy healing. There is digital health in the United States that's being developed that is energy healing. It's not at all what plant energy healing is about. Ayahuasca is not our medicine. It is your medicine. And we're trying our best to be bridge keepers and working with people like Claude Gouslaine to help us translate and understand this. And the last thing we want to be or do or perpetrate is the past actions of extractive capitalists who have had no concern for anything other than corporate interests or government interests. So we look forward to working together to develop best practices.
Thank you, Victoria. Leanna, do you have anything to add? You're muted, Leanna.
When Victoria and I first met, we started talking about what does reciprocity mean and what does it mean for our work. And so we knew right from the beginning that it was going to take relationship building, and we knew that building real relationships takes time. And I just attended a session that Didier Lacatte was presenting, Lacaze, I think is his name, where he said it's long-term relationships. It's what Kathleen Harrison's talk was about, long-term relationships. And building those relationships takes time. And one of the reasons we're so happy to be part of this conference is to see Chacruna as a bridge, and the Reciprocity initiative that Chacruna is sponsoring is, we want to be part of that. We want to help. We want to participate.
Okay. Thank you, Leanna. So I'm just, I'm not commenting, I'm keeping it rolling because we have a nice flow of questions that kind of rolls with the issues as we've kind of developed them. And maybe afterwards there'll be time for, further reflection. The next question is for Miguel. Miguel, la siguiente pregunta es para ti. I'm going to read, voy a leer en inglés primero. What strategies do you consider necessary for the protection of the ayahuasca's indigenous cultural and genetic heritage in international spaces? How can we establish an international consultation protocol regarding disputes and interests about ayahuasca in the scientific, economic, and academic fields in relation to the globalization of ayahuasca? How can we create consultation to the indigenous groups when ayahuasca is used by multiple indigenous groups? In Spanish, Miguel, ¿qué estrategias considera necesarias para la protección del patrimonio cultural y genético indígena de la ayahuasca o el yagé en los espacios internacionales? ¿Cómo establecer un protocolo de consulta internacional sobre disputas y en intereses sobre la ayahuasca en el ámbito científico, económico y académico en relación con la globalización de la ayahuasca o el yagé? ¿Cómo podemos crear un mecanismo de consulta a los grupos indígenas cuando la ayahuasca, el yagé, el capi es utilizado por múltiples grupos indígenas? Entonces es la pregunta o las preguntas.
Gracias. Pues, antes de contestar a las preguntas, me preocupa verdaderamente, siento un dolor intenso, muy triste escuchar a las compañeras de cabello blanco cuando hablan de medicalizar. Medicalizar y hablamos de reciprocidad. Y eso, así han llegado a las comunidades. Conocieran, compañeras, en qué momento nos encontramos los pueblos indígenas. ¿En qué nos encontramos? Entendieron un poco. Las comunidades indígenas estamos fracturadas. Estamos cansados verdaderamente. Pasando. Cada vez somos menos. Y cada vez la amenaza es más fuerte. No solamente desde este proceso. Llegaron así. La investigación llegó así a las comunidades, diciendo de que nosotros no somos empresa, pero luego se convirtieron en empresa. Eso hay que tener mucho claro. Ahí no hay desconfianza. Y en primer lugar, yo sí, para contestar, como les decía anteriormente, no soy bueno para ese formato, pero me gusta ser claro. Así me enseñaron mis abuelas, mis abuelos, cómo se debía de expresarse. Primero, el llamado es a la conciencia. Y el segundo es al respeto a las plantas medicinales. No podemos alterar al espíritu de las plantas maestras.
Ya voy a traducir, ya, porque es mucho, ya. He's saying, Miguel is saying that listening to this, what you're all saying about medicalizing ayahuasca is very sad for him. Ya, no, déjeme traducir un poco, Miguel, por favor. He's saying it's very sad. He feels a very intense pain. And when he hears this talk about reciprocity, he's just concerned that he's just not seeing themselves being seen. He's like, when are we going to be seen? When are they going to, find us where we are fractured, tired, exhausted? Every day we are less, and the threat is greater. Every day they are less. Every day the threat is greater. He says, when the investigations came, when scientists came before, they said, no, it's not going to be this, it's not going to be that, and then it became a business. So he says it's not a distrust. It's like for him it's clear. So he says, and it was difficult for him. He doesn't like this format because we're talking about the sacred plants in this format, which should not be talked about this way. He says when we talk about, according to the grandparents, first, we need to, come to our conscience at first. And second, we need to respect, the plants. We can't alter their spirit. Sigue, Miguel. Estás congelado, Miguel. Ahí. ¿Algo más? ¿Me escuchas, Miguel? I think we lost him, or we may have lost Miguel temporarily. Ricardo, si me puedes mandar un WhatsApp a ver, indicar. Miguel, ¿nos escucha?
Yo veo,
Okay.
viendo, y hemos entendido.
Veo la reciprocidad.
Y
Hemos entendido las comunicaciones.
Sí,
Sí, estoy escuchando.
Ya, muy bien. Entonces, puede hablar, por favor. Sí.
Te escucho.
¿Avanzo?
Sí, sí.
Entonces, habla de reciprocidad, nosotros, que esa reciprocidad es una reciprocidad porque hemos liberado, no hay la liberación de la madre tierra. Verdaderamente seguimos tratando con privatizar la vida. Eso hay que entender. Mejor el llamado es y desde luego, cuando me hablan de patrimonialización, pues para nosotros ya
Cultural de los pueblos
indígenas.
Además, existen, compañeras y compañeros, existen unos tratados internacionales, como es el Convenio
160,
la Declaración Universal de las Naciones Unidas
sobre los derechos de los pueblos. Pero hay normas que cumplen, no a las normas.
siempre vulneran,
Siempre violan su consentimiento previo libre informado. Queremos iniciar desde la palabra del respeto a la cultura. Entonces, ese es mi llamado. Y ahora, ¿cómo podemos nosotros sentarnos con los demás pueblos? Pues su forma de abrir un debate y de compartir y de buscar mecanismos de salvaguardar los medicinales.
Yeah, muy bien, Miguel. Gracias. So Miguel says that, when this term is brought up to him, he says this reciprocity to his people, to his community, they understand that means damage. That, from what they can see so far, the Mother Earth is not free, has not been freed. It continues to be an attempt to privatize our life. He says what we should be focused on, the focus should be on unity. He says that's what we should be focusing on is unity. As far as the patrimony, the protection of the patrimony, he's like, that's there. We have that. We are that. That's already established. The problem is, says they already there. For example, he cites, it was a little broken up there, but he cites a UN treaty that's already exists to protect their rights, to protect all this patrimony. He says, but they never respect it, that it's always violated, that their rights are always violated. And so he says, if we want to start, we need to start with respect, and we need to respect the word. He says their word has not meant much to them. So how do we start to respect the culture? And then as far as how do we deal with these different indigenous cultures and their different attitudes? Like, well, each one of them has their own way to open up, to discuss these topics, and each one of them can contribute perhaps to the discussion of how we develop these mechanisms to create this consultation. Muchas gracias, Miguel. Entonces voy a seguir.
That's
Okay, so moving into the next thing, I think is Daiara. So Daiara, this is the second round of questions for you. You talk a lot about cultural appropriation, but isn't this an influence of Western and Euro-American thoughts being Amazonian shamanism that has been characterized traditionally by mixture and exchange? Do you think that non-Indigenous people should be allowed to use ayahuasca do you think that non-indigenous ayahuasca use should be criminalized in the United States? We lost your video, Daiara, but I think we hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I thought those questions were really funny.
It was a group effort.
You know, I was listening to Miguel, and I must confess that I am also a little bit nervous and really very concerned about this discussion and this initiative. It was even a moment that I didn't want it to be here, because for me it's so violent. It's so violent to hear about what is being done with something that is so sacred, that means everything for our nation, everything, all our knowledge, all our history, everything. And you know, it's really ironic that the man that classified botanically the ayahuasca, Richard Spruce, that classified the Banisteriopsis capi, right? Yeah. He was looking for rubber. He was looking for rubber when he went to the Amazon. It was in the middle of the World War. And you know what the rubber market made to us, indigenous nations in the Amazon? They killed us.
Richard Schultes, yeah.
Schultes. The story of the selling of rubber is the greatest story of the greatest genocide in the Amazon with indigenous nations. And it was because of the rubber industry and market and the rubber slavery that ayahuasca came to globalization, if you think well about it, because the daime, the Santo Daime, was born in the middle of the rubber extraction. Schultes went there looking for rubber to exploit for war. And so that's how our most sacred medicine ended gaining the world. And it's really people try to make a trap, making this question and asking, okay, but what the hell is cultural appropriation? Isn't we always have exchange. Can you explain to me how rubber ended in Polynesia, or how ayahuasca ended in Hawaii? If we took another word, a juridic definition for that, it can also be called like biopiracy, biopirataria, because it was not given. There was no exchange. There was never an exchange with the Western culture and indigenous peoples. We are trying to explain it, and we are facing it for at least 500 years. So you can tell me about empirism and practical experience. We know what is genocide. Don't question, don't try to deny our understanding of genocide, because is it the problem that white people are drinking ayahuasca? No. I think it's a problem that there are more white people that drink ayahuasca than indigenous people, because that didn't change anything about the racism we are facing. Do you think the non-indigenous use of ayahuasca should be criminalized? No, and the indigenous either. But when anything happens, those that are criminalized and ¿cómo se dice culpado?
But blamed.
blamed by any problem with ayahuasca are indigenous communities, because everybody knows it is from indigenous origin. If a person that uses ayahuasca, and you're talking about, I found that word really, really eccentric, like shamanic practitioner. Shamanic practitioner. In my culture, we don't have shamans. We have Kumuan, Baya, Yaiwa. You're talking about when I stopped and for hours to understand this project. The thing that I understood is that you are talking about legislation, a standardization of something that is not unique. And even with the idea of making one formula, ayahuasca is not a formula for any indigenous culture. It's not a matter of formula, but how it's done and by whom it's done. You're talking about creating a corporation to do the whole legal process and finding finance. And I ask myself, who is going to finance that, and what will be the profits for that? You're talking about the expansion of the plantation of ayahuasca vines in North America and in the United States territory. And I ask myself, okay, who is owning those lands? Who is going to, what are the interests on that exploitation, and how it will be affect the communities around? Because we know that ayahuasca, of course, is being a problem in the exploitation in the Amazon rainforest. And even like that, we are not gaining millions with that. There is a question of markets. When you talk about demand, affordability, or market, you're talking on capitalistic terms that are not part of our understanding on how to relate to ayahuasca. When you say about giving certification to shamanic practitioners, we are going all by the opposite way on what we consider to be a real medicine man, a real healer. We don't have certificates. And when you talk about reciprocity, can our experience
Miguel, si puede apagar, Miguel, se oye mucho. Yeah, go ahead, Daiara. And then we can wrap it up soon, Daiara, please. And then okay.
I'm ending, but can you understand that every scientific experience that we have had with Western culture and with Western science is only of extermination? For me, that is the center of the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Daiara. Miguel, parece que se fue la luz para Ricardo. Entonces después vamos a tener que traducir a ti lo que están hablando, ¿ok? Porque es un poco difícil para mí, porque ahí falta 15 minutos. Entonces después vamos a traducir un poco, pero o Daiara también le puede decir, pero será después. Ok, qué pena. So the next question, to keep it moving, we just have a little bit more time, so we're trying to cover as much as we can, but thank you everybody for everything that you're expressing. So the question for Leanna and Victoria. So then this is another direction. You claim that FDA approval would help towards rescheduling ayahuasca out of DEA Schedule 1 and place it into Schedule 3 or 4, which are less restrictive, and that this could possibly bring more legitimacy to ayahuasca and ayahuasca traditional practices. In sum, that by FDA approval would potentially benefit the non-medical use of ayahuasca. But aren't you in fact creating a business model based largely on venture capital that will ultimately create an expensively patented product that is beneficial for you only? How do you combine the investor's needs with the alleged social benefits of your public benefit corporation? So it goes to the both of you.
I will begin. Although it's true we are a company in the United States, we're not a charity. We are not a classic for-profit company. We're a hybrid nonprofit for-profit. We are not speaking with venture capitalists about venture capital types of investments and the high profits that are required. We're speaking with philanthropists and impact investors. We do not have any patents for this product. It's not ours to patent, and what we're doing is in the public space. What we have described doing is what FDA requires, for instance, standardized.
Micrófono, por favor, Miguel. Miguel, se oye lo que estás escuchando.
Okay, and then just one more point. It's our view that the US played a pivotal role globally in making many of these medicines illegal. So if there is a way to make a medicine like ayahuasca less illegal, it is still scheduled, but it will not be Schedule 1 if we're successful in the FDA path to demonstrate efficacy, so effectiveness in a particular disease, to show that it is safe or causes minimal harm, and that it is not addictive. Those are the criteria that we need to move forward with FDA to reschedule from Schedule 1. And we would love to have a dialogue as to our view that having ayahuasca not be a Schedule 1 illegal compound could help with the situation that the world is in with regard to these medicines. So the FDA is a path to help open up and address some of these challenges.
Leanna, do you have anything to add? Just the one thing that I don't know if it was, okay, I think we addressed everything. Okay, well, thank you. So now I'm going to continue. Miguel, el siguiente pregunta es para ti, ¿ya? Qué pena que Ricardo, no sé si ha traducido lo que ha pasado, ¿le ha tocado o no?
No, se le fue la línea.
Yeah.
No sé si me puede estar traduciendo.
Yeah, después vamos a hablar para explicar más que todo lo que dijo Daiara y las señoras, pero por ahora vamos a seguir. So we have a next round of questions for Miguel. So the question in English is, it's missing here. Recently, the Umiyak has put a declaration saying that non-Indigenous people should not use ayahuasca without the blessings of Indigenous people. However, non-Indigenous people have used ayahuasca for centuries, and Indigenous people have also collaborated with non-Indigenous ones for centuries. How can this sort of more orthodox approach help mitigate the potential damages of ayahuasca globalization? Are there legitimate non-Indigenous uses of ayahuasca? What can we do about Westerners' apparent intense hunger for ayahuasca healing? Entonces, en español. Recientemente, la UMIYAC ha hecho una declaración diciendo que las personas no indígenas no deben usar ayahuasca o yagé sin las bendiciones autorización de los indígenas. Sin embargo, los no indígenas han usado la ayahuasca durante siglos, y los indígenas también han colaborado con los no indígenas durante siglos. ¿Cómo puede este tipo de enfoque más ortodoxo ayudar a mitigar los daños potenciales de la globalización de la ayahuasca? ¿Existen usos legítimos no indígenas de la ayahuasca? ¿Qué podemos hacer con respecto al aparente intenso hambre o deseo de los occidentales para la curación con la ayahuasca? Ya, sigue Miguel.
A ver. No soy bueno para entender la palabra ortodoxa, pero el diccionario me ayuda bastante. Saber de qué se trata ese concepto y la palabra. Muy importante. Conocer a la medicina tradicional de los pueblos indígenas. Y yo siendo de esta cultura, siendo originario de estas tierras ancestrales, tierras sagradas, yo pienso que la medicina, aquí nosotros no ponemos, nosotros no, las reglas, las normas, el principio de la medicina, de la planta sagrada del yagé, es la ley espiritual. Primero que todo, son leyes espirituales, son normas espirituales respetar, acatarla. Eso nosotros no la ponemos, no pone el pueblo indígena, sino eso es espíritus de la madre naturaleza y la, en primer lugar, tener
a esa pregunta. Y más allá, nosotros pues hemos visto, digamos, con esto,
lo que lo estamos llevando los pueblos indígenas a tener un consumo de la medicina, la sagrada medicina, de una manera responsable, ¿sí? De una manera responsable, porque pues y nuevamente con grandes preocupaciones seguir haciendo. Yo veo que cada vez que difundir más, difundir, medicalizarla, y sabiendo de que cuando se medica pendiente, cada vez aparecen más enfermedades. Eso lo estamos viviendo, por no respetarla a ese principio de las plantas maestras. Por eso nosotros, como pueblos indígenas, tenemos que cada vez que alteramos esos conocimientos, creciendo a la cada vez más dependiente, ir a las farmacias, más allá, y la farmacia no sana, perdón, no sana. La farmacia solamente es como, pero las plantas medicinales, si respetamos, sí nos puede sanar, sí nos puede curar de las diferentes enfermedades.
Ya, muy bien, Miguel, gracias. Oh, sigue.
y otra,
Después, avanza.
Okay. Miguel is saying that, in response to the question, as an indigenous person, he listens to his ancestors, to his elders, and for them, they don't make the rules as far as these norms and who should not. It says for them, it's the spiritual law that comes first. That's what tells us, that's what we should respect, that law, the spiritual law, coming through the voice of Mother Nature from the sacred plants. And if we listen to that, we have an opportunity to learn about how to responsibly consume these plants. And so, but he says, but meanwhile, things are moving and it's of great concern to him. And so the medicine is spreading, they want to medicalize it. He says, but once they medicalize it, then what happens is we become dependent. He says, if you don't respect the master plants, then every time we alter this relationship, we impoverish Mother Nature. So we end up with more pharmacy, more pharmaceuticals, more illness, more dependency. It says the pharmacy doesn't cure, but if we learn how to respect the plants and use the plants well, then that can heal us. Okay, Miguel, un poco más y ya tengo que darle tiempo. Oh, we lost Miguel. Let's give him 1 minute to see if he comes back.
I would like to compliment that 1 century of ayahuasca churches are not comparable to millennia of indigenous knowledge on that plant.
Thank you. So I'm going to give him a minute, but if he doesn't show up, then Daiara, I'm going to move to you with the final question, because really we only have, I think, when does this end? Does anyone know? 45 after? Volunteer, can you tell me when this is supposed to be over? In the chat or somewhere? 4:40. So we still have 15, 16 minutes. So tomorrow. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see if Miguel, if he comes back, we'll bring him back. Okay, but for now, I'm going to move to Daiara to take advantage of this time to hit our last question. Daiara, the third round of question for you is, and I didn't write all these questions, but I'm sharing with you, and thank you for. Hey, Miguel's back. We'll give. Hey, Miguel, ya. Sigue, Miguel. Puedes seguir.
Ya.
Un rato más. Sí.
Disculpa que estoy en la selva.
He's in the jungle. He says, I'm sorry.
Las selvas amazónicas.
In the Amazonian jungle.
las cordilleras.
Disculpará, no tengo luz.
He says,
No
he doesn't even have electricity. Sigue, Miguel, gracias.
Entonces nosotros los pueblos indígenas y la organización como tal, nosotros no somos nadie para juzgar Para la pregunta,
cuando dicen,
cuando para la pregunta existe un uso legítimo.
Yeah.
Eso no es, nosotros no somos jueces para juzgar o legitimidad o no legitimidad. Solamente hay que entender que detrás de la sagrada del una cultura, y dentro de una cultura los pueblos indígenas en pie de lucha y resistencia frente a todos los atropellos que el gobierno y el nos quiere verlos totalmente desaparecidos de este mundo terrenal. Nosotros estamos buscando con esto decir que sagrada no queremos que la medicina sagrada de los pueblos indígenas monopolizada, primero que todo, que no cambie de concepto, que se respete a los indígenas, porque si no nos atacan por delante, nos atacan por detrás, por todos lados somos atacados, por delante, por atrás están las empresas mineras, las organizaciones supuestamente que se dicen serse comunitarias, pero lo único que hacen es tener conocimiento para luego irnos, implementar
biopiratería, lo que decía aquí, Daiara,
lo que
seguirán
exterminando, y con esto quedaremos, existíamos los pueblos indígenas, llegaremos hasta allí. Cuando los pueblos indígenas, los guardianes de la Amazonía colombiana, y terminamos, toda la
humanidad, estamos condenados a sufrir el experimento,
no solamente los pueblos indígenas.
Cuando hablan del hambre,
de la medicina,
la ayahuasca,
el hambre es del sistema capitalista que nos quiere destruir a toda la humanidad, a los pueblos indígenas. Eso es lo que tenemos que tomar, esa conciencia, reflexionar, que cómo queremos verdaderamente aportar, cómo podemos verdaderamente, puesto la camisa de los pueblos indígenas, ayudarnos en esto dentro de las comunidades para fortalecer, y desde luego nosotros seguir cultivando esta cultura. Estamos viendo la enfermedad occidental a un mercado, a nuestros conocimientos, mercantil, militar los procesos. Entonces, mi llamado es a tomar conciencia, a respetar. Porque estamos en alto riesgo. Los pueblos amazónicos de Colombia estamos en alto riesgo de ser totalmente exterminados de esta tierra que es pulmón del mundo, de toda la vida, de toda la humanidad. Muchas gracias.
Ya, gracias, Miguel. ¿Está bien?
Gracias.
Okay, I'm going to try to... Sí, muchas gracias a usted. So, I'm trying to see where I left off here. He says back to the question of, is there legitimate use? Is there such a thing as non-Indigenous legitimate use? He says, we are not the judge. You know, we are not here to judge who is legitimate and who's not. Along the lines of, like Daiara had said, he said, you know, but behind this medicine is a tradition and there is a culture. And he says their culture will continue to try to exist, to resist against the government, against the capitalist system, which does seem to be hell-bent, as he would say, to eradicate them. So he says, you know, what are they looking for? What they don't want is for the medicine to be monopolized. They don't want the medicine to be violated. They don't want the medicine to be disrespected. And similarly, they don't want the indigenous communities to be disrespected. It says because they're either being attacked by the front, it says by their government, for example, or from behind, from mining companies, from other companies, or conservation efforts that end up being, you know, systems that are gathering information that then will later be used for more extraction. So he says they are the guardians of the Colombian Amazon, his people. And so if they are exterminated, it's everyone's fault. You know, that's a globalization concern right there, the extermination of their people. So it's everyone's fault. So he says, about this hunger for the medicine. What about the hunger for the medicine from the Western people? He says, well, it's the capitalist system that is hungry to destroy indigenous culture. Says that's what we should be reflecting on. He says this is really how can we really help? How can we help these people continue to live and guard the Amazon? And so it says, it's a call right now. Because this Western illness is continuing, though it's moving along and trying to commercialize their knowledge. So it says his call is to raise our consciousness, to raise our consciousness and to reflect, on what he's talking about. So now I'm going to go to Daiara. Daiara, we have a little bit more time. And so at least we're getting to all the questions. And you can say, this is your opportunity. So Daiara, here's the question. You expressed concerns about introducing extensive planting of vines in chacruna and territories that are not original to these plants, such as Hawaii, Costa Rica, or Australia. Do you think it's best that non-Indigenous people don't plant ayahuasca? Should ayahuasca always be used from the Amazon? Wouldn't it be good that United States Americans could consume ayahuasca in the U.S. and not need to travel to the Amazon or to Costa Rica? That's the question, and I give you the floor, Daiara. You're on mute, Daiara.
That is also a funny question. I don't know if I am really concerned because it's already happening, and but yes, there is a concern with the use of ayahuasca and the use and the relation to the plant. Actually, as Miguel was saying, there are many indigenous cultures that have this plant of power as a reference from all the knowledge that we have. And we relate in a very different way. The whole idea of planting ayahuasca for a market is really new. We never had it. So that is already an effect of the capitalism and the globalization. It's already something that we need to deal with. On where are these plants going and what is being done with them. I don't know if in this conference, but I heard in the World Conference that we had here in Brazil that, for example, in Australia they are already making pills of ayahuasca, because if you are in a country where you don't have a traditional indigenous nation that has a legal right to the preservation of that culture, for us it's really more difficult to protect our cultural heritage in a foreign country. It's like it makes no sense. It's already very difficult to protect our cultural heritage here in our country, in Brazil, or in Colombia or the other countries. It's really difficult. We have many international and national agreements. As for example, here, the Brazilian Constitution recognizes the right to the land and to the culture and practices of indigenous nations. That is also recognized by the treaties of the UN, the UNESCO, the Organization of American States, International Lab Organization, the Convention on Biological Diversity. Every convention recognizes the rights of indigenous peoples to have our practice and uses and our cultural tradition. And and they say that is here in Brazil we say, no sé cómo se dice en inglés, si me puedes ayudar, pero aquí decimos de derecho originario como cláusula pétrea. O sea, nuestro derecho existe antes del derecho de los blancos, porque nosotros somos.
It's their original right before there were legal rights, no? Algo así?
Yeah, that is recognized as an original right that goes before every other right, every other law written by Western culture on this land. That is never respected. The real concern on is the difficult, is even the difficulty. That is really funny, because it's almost impossible to transmit, to share the whole complexity of the knowledge of ayahuasca. To be a traditional healer, you need to be indigenous. You need to speak that language. You need to have an ancestrality, a spiritual ancestrality to guide you. If you don't speak that language, and if you don't have that ancestrality, it will be almost impossible to understand fully what we got in our traditions with that medicine. So for us, there is not such as a shamanic certified practitioner. Neo-shamanism is so new. It's so new. It's incomparable to what we know in our families. And in our families and in our nation, we still got that very, very hard. Is the most sacred treasure we have. Sorry, I'm thinking in Portuguese. So
we just have a few minutes left.
Okay. When I know I'm really young. I decided to study human rights to try to follow and understand the violences that are committed to indigenous peoples. And as an indigenous woman that is part of a ayahuasca nation, ayahuasca indigenous nation, when I say, for example, when I see all the conflicts that are made into the communities that receive ayahuasca tourism, for example, I am really horrified. I see indigenous nations that have families divided, like struggling or fighting to see who is the next to receive the dumbest and richest white people, white person in their communities. Because that tourism is really important to develop projects and to have money, and we need money to have transportation and communication and education, etc. But people are fighting on who is going to receive the richest ones. I am not interested in that. I personally don't want tourists in my nation, in my territory. I think that is really, really dangerous. It's a shock of realities that we don't need in my nation. I disagree. It's a personal opinion. I know that there are very few people, few nations that are worldwide known for sharing ayahuasca around the world. I know they share their songs. I myself love that sharing. I participate to that sharing as well. And I know that very probably some of them, their leaders, will agree, will give their permission to many scientific or academical practices, because they have a good economic experience with ayahuasca, but they are not the only nations that have right to a consultation. And the right to consultation is sacred for us. I didn't, just to finish, I was so...
It's gonna close on us. It'll close on us, I think. So but I want to be able to thank everybody.
I was really worried about all this discussion. I beg your pardon if I was rude in any time, but it's just a perception as a researcher on human rights. I am really sad because for me, it's like our nations are being raped, violated. I was raped once when I was 15 years old. I know what is to be raped. And I was saying to Bia, oh my God, they are crazy. What are they doing? They are raping us again. And she only said to me, listen, it is already happening. It is going to happen. It's going to happen anyways. That is they always say that. The white people say that it's going to happen anyways. So it doesn't matter. Single indigenous nation says no because they're going to do it. Because genocide is already happening. So the best way to answer the first question, the best way to be an ally to a non-indigenous peoples to be an ally sometimes may require to listen to a single word, no, and step back. Try it. Try just one time to see if we manage to have the space to breathe, to reinforce our cultures, to protect our territories, and to find other creative ways to make connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Daiara. Thank you very much. I think we're out of time, is what I understand. I don't know. I think did everyone leave? I think ya lo cerraron. I think because I don't see the people, huh? I don't know if they're here. But thank you, everybody, for being here, for saying everything you said. It's recording, so just know that we're still recording. But thank you, all of you, for listening to each other and for saying what you need to say. Miguel, muchas gracias. Yo creo que ya se cerró porque yo no veo a la gente ahí en el chat chateando, pero quería agradecerles a todos ustedes. A ver si después, si queremos, podemos traducir un poquito más lo que habló Daiara y las señoras o aquí mismo. Pero gracias a ustedes, ¿no? Aquí están. I don't know if there's something you both want to say to Miguel, Leanna, and Victoria. I can translate for you, or if they're going to close this room.
Thank you so much. We learn so much each time. It's not our intention to rape or to harm, and we would benefit so much by continuing a conversation. I don't know if you're willing to, because you teach us so much.
It's that, and for the Daiara too, right? I believe. But she heard you. Miguel, ella te quiere decir, porque Daiara acaba de decir, ¿no? Que un problema es que aunque ellos dicen cómo se puede aliar, ¿no? Con gente que no son indígenas, cómo uno puede ser un buen amigo a la comunidad indígena. Su consejo es quizás por una vez, quizás solo una vez, cuando ellos le dicen no, que le escuchan y que te alejas, ¿no? Entonces, ella dice, y que ella siente, que Daiara dice que se siente violada, ¿no? Con todo lo que es la idea de medicalizar, ¿no? La medicina. Entonces las señoras estas les dicen a ustedes, pues ellos no quieren violar, no quieren hacer daño, no quieren, y lo que ellos quieren es seguir hablando con ustedes, quizás si están abiertos a comunicar con ellas para poder seguir aprendiendo de ustedes. ¿Me oíste, Miguel?
Gracias. Te estoy escuchando. Gracias.
Sí.
Y
ya.
Ahora que estamos aquí, gracias, Daiara, por tus palabras. Muy importante unir esfuerzos, unirnos, unir la humanidad, el respeto. El respeto. Porque lo que nosotros estamos es solicitando que haya entendimiento, que nos escuchen a la voz, digamos, de la madre naturaleza, a la voz de la madre tierra, a la voz de las fuentes, de los recursos naturales, de fauna y flora. A eso es lo que nosotros nos referimos, la cultura. Y es verdad, existe la manipulación a la cultura, y es muy triste lo que nos está pasando. Yo siempre vengo diciendo la apropiación cultural. Si no está maquillando por todos lados, exterminar a los pueblos indígenas. No es, si no es una, es otra. Si no es la medicina, la están patentando a otra de los pueblos indígenas. Entonces, aquí en los pueblos indígenas no estamos diciendo vayas en ustedes allá y nosotros acá. Y esa unidad desde el buen entendimiento. Y eso siempre repetiré. Decía una lideresa que se murió por luchar y por decir la verdad. Si no hablamos, y si hablamos, entonces, palabra que
siempre hemos venido practicando y usando las comunidades indígenas es
el respeto hacia las cuencas. Y si
queremos
queremos
unirnos
a esta lucha de
la vida, es mirar a ver cómo verdaderamente pueden apoyar a las comunidades.
hay diferentes procesos organizativos, diferentes procesos de fortalecer una cultura, pero no
de
de
exterminio.
estamos cansados ya.
Hablando que cada día es cultural.
Desde 1492 hasta el 2021 seguimos siendo invadidos, saqueados, exterminados. Entonces, creo que es el momento de decir ya no más. Déjenos descansar, déjenos vivir armonizados en nuestros territorios. Y si quieren, como nuevamente, aquí hay muchas luchas.
Estamos invitando a que vengan y tengan esas intenciones
De
a nuestras herramientas que
son de vital.
por vivir en el tiempo.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Miguel. So Miguel is saying that, you know, what he's hoping for is respect and understanding. You know, he says that's the goal. He says, yeah, for him too, it's a violation. He feels violated. That it is like a rape. He says it just seems to him every time they're trying to dress up in a different way, the eventual extermination, you know, whether it's through the plants or through another plant. But he says at the same time, he's not saying to you, go away, you know, don't come here, don't talk to us. He says he's not saying that, but he's saying, please listen to them, you know. What they're asking for is unity, you know. They're asking for unity. This is for to protect their human rights. They have many processes going on. Daiara, as well as an activist, both of them are involved in many processes in the Amazon that they're part of, that they could use support, you know, to strengthen what they're trying to do as leaders, as brilliant people in their own culture. He says it's been from 1400s to 2000, the same story. He says, you know, please let us rest. Give us a chance to protect our land, to protect our culture. And I would just add, you know, my comment, and I think we're going to close. It just is interesting, you know, because this whole situation, and it's interesting, you know, that just this call you've had to do this, you know, that perhaps the medicine guided you to do this, you know, but I would add that, you know, for me, and I'm not an expert, and there's people who know much more than me, but that perhaps is guiding you to this moment, you know, to listen to these people, and then to see where we go from there. You know, I would just really say that. And so I'm going to close with that because I think everyone, I need to go. But thank you so much for, you know, and the question. Thank you for everyone making the most of this. I really appreciate it. Miguel, yo le estoy diciendo, ya tengo que cerrar, ¿no? Esto. Acabo de decirle a ellas, y te voy a decir a ti, Miguel, que yo los conozco un poco a ellas, ¿no? Yo le hablé a ellas un poquito, entender un poco más. Y yo sé que ellos sienten que las mismas plantas les han guiado, ¿no? A esta idea, ¿no? Ellos han tenido esa experiencia. Entonces yo les digo a ellos, y yo no que yo soy tan experto, pero mi intuición es que quizás esa visión que ellos tuvieron, no sé de dónde sacaron la idea, era para guiarlos a este momento en que estamos ahora mismo, para que ellos puedan escuchar a ti y a Daiara, y para que ellos puedan reflexionar y a ver, ¿no? Entonces ahí vamos a seguir hablando con Ricardo, a ver con Daiara, a ver si esta gente de verdad pues pueden apoyar de otra forma, ¿no? Con los recursos que supuestamente ellos pueden, ¿no? Acceder. Entonces, muchísimas gracias para su tiempo, a ustedes, a Daiara también, ¿no? Muy obrigado, lindísimo lo que hablaste, ¿ya? Thank you, everybody. Okay, very beautiful. Thank you for everyone's taking a little bit of fire. It's important. También, blessings. Okay, I'm going to close it. Maybe we can continue the discussion, you know, little by little, Victoria and Leanna, through me, through Bia, okay, through these. All right, let's keep going.
Great.
Buenas noches. Good night. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Good
Gracias.
night, everyone.